you truly never know um, what's around the next corner. In
Right.
fact, one of my attempts, the police officer who rescued me told me that life is like the ocean. You never know what the next wave is going to bring in. You know, that the only thing that is truly there that we can put our hope in is Jesus. Like, he's the
Yes.
only thing that no matter what, there's Jesus. No matter if this life ends, there's still Jesus.
Well, that's so beautiful. And you know what? There could be a listener out here that is like that right now. And those two words really resonate with them, Jessica.
So,
And you could be saving the life of a woman that could be listening to this right now.
You're listening to Altered Stories with Michelle Gutch.
Hello, friends. Have you encountered abuse, loss, sickness, trauma, or devastating relationships in your life? Are you in need of help, love, redemption, healing, forgiveness, restoration, and hope? Well, my special guest today, Jessica Stone, is a gifted storyteller and the author of 2 fiction books, Beauty and the Bittersweet and the Thorn Bush Juniper Story series, and enjoys writing about mothers and daughter relationships. Her own story includes crisis, abuse, loss, sickness, trauma, and devastating relationships. It's a lot, friends. And we're going to talk with Jessica today. And so, friends, I'm very excited that she's here with us. We have tried to record this once, and this is our second time, but I know there's a reason that we're doing this. And I'm excited that we can get it coordinated and get her back here to share. And this is your chief storyteller host, friends, Michelle Saunders Gutch, and you are listening to the Altered Story Show, Season 5, Episode 181. And Jessica will be sharing her Hope Remains God's story. And I'm going to share a few words, Jessica, and then we're going to bring you to the mic here. So thank you for being so patient. The Altered Story Show, friends, shares transformational Christian God stories from all over the world so women around the world can hear them and never feel alone in their struggles. And thank you for listening to and watching our show. And if one of our God stories has blessed you, then do bless us with a pay it forward donation to help other women share their God stories like Jessica. So here's what you need to know about Jessica. I'm going to share a few words in addition to what I've shared. She is a mom of daughter Kaylee, and she enjoys spending time with her mom, her own mother, weekly, or sipping espresso at a Parisian cafe. So, welcome to the show, Jessica. How are you doing today? And what else can you share about who you are? That is a fun thing to know that would bless my global audience.
Michelle, thank you so much for having me on again. I am really excited to be here. I am getting ready to leave to meet my daughter Kaylee in Rome. She actually lives in Paris, but in a week I will be on my way to Rome to spend some time with her. She always says that if I just go to Paris, that it's not a vacation for her. So we are going to fly her out to meet us there for a few days. And yes, I do. I love to spend time with both my mom and my daughter, and the three of us get to spend some time together. I've taken my mom to Paris, and of course, Kaylee comes back home a couple times a year. But I do write women's contemporary fiction that is rooted in faith. And I love to write mother-daughter stories because my relationship with my own mother, I was a bit of a troublemaker growing up, so it took us
No.
it I hate to think of the time that I wasted not, listening to her wisdom, but when I had my own daughter, I was just about to turn 21, and my relationship with my mom just drastically improved as she helped me become a mom since I was so young. And my daughter and I always say we have a Gilmore Girls-esque relationship. She is just the best thing, and I don't deserve someone as wonderful as her. So I would say, really my most amazing part of my story that you might not remember or didn't share just now is that Kaylee's father and um, I was, as I said, young when I became pregnant with her, but he and I were not married. We did not stay together, and it wasn't until my daughter turned 18 that we reconnected and saw each other again after truly not speaking or seeing each other for 18 years. And just a couple of years later, Kaylee convinced us to fly to Vegas to elope. So we've been married now for about 8, almost 9 years. And yeah, all because
Wow.
that was
Yeah.
just the way God worked our story.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot in your story. But before we jump into getting into the nuts and bolts, because I mean, you know, there's the backstory, right? Two stories. There is all of that. Um, but from my perspective, I am um so passionate about women's stories and sharing them because of their relatability, because of how women have so much healing too that they find when they share their stories or when some woman heals from listening to another woman's story. Because, when you're out there and you're dealing with some of the circumstantial issues that women deal with at times in their life as a result of brokenness, you think you're never going to work through it at times when you're going through it, especially if you don't have faith, you know, that's a hard thing. But when you hear another woman's story that you can relate to, there's just something powerful in that. So I would like to know if there's a story that you've heard that really made an impact on your life. Um, and if you could share what that kind of a little bit about that story, that would be great before we jump in to more about yours.
Definitely. When I first started writing fiction, which was where I jumped off, it was because I really did not want to share anything about my personal life.
Right.
I carried so much shame for the choices I'd made, and really that was something hard for me to find when I was getting to know other Christian writers and really putting myself into that space. Um, I just felt like everyone else had it all together. And that was really hard for me to feel like I had a place in that because I didn't want to share my story. And it was a long time before I even talked about how my marriage came about. Um, it was just a lot of weight that I was still carrying, and heaviness and guilt. And
Yeah.
um, I ended up signing with my literary agency. Actually, my agent was the only agent I pitched with my story back in early 2021. And I signed with them, and it just happened to be that they were having an anniversary of how long they'd been in business at the time. So they were doing this really wonderful in person retreat for all of their authors. And there are hundreds of authors with the agency, but a couple hundred of us met in Savannah, Georgia. And that was where I got to know people there, and it was an interestingly intimate gathering for that many people, and for people that many of which had never met in person before. And some
Right.
of those stories that I was hearing there made me realize, what we see on social media or what we assume from what we see and even what people choose to put out there, it is curated.
Mm-hmm.
And getting to know some of those women made me realize, like, I'm not the only person that's been divorced. I'm not the only person that had a baby out of wedlock. I'm not the only person that lived with an abusive spouse. My first husband was abusive. And one of the agents at my agency got up on the stage and shared some really deeply personal things about how traumatic her first marriage had been. And yeah, I think it's just, it's important to know that whatever you're going through, you are really not the only person to ever go through it. And there's such a benefit in people being able to be vulnerable with those stories because
Yeah.
um like my agent at first was like, you really have to be careful about how you say things. And I took it to mean like, don't admit all of the darkness. Or really she was saying, when you admit to the darkness, show the light that came from it. And that was hard for me because I was still in the thick of so much,
Yeah.
just not things that I was going through at that time, but things I hadn't resolved yet.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your authenticity and you're willing to talk about some of the personal things now, especially as we talk more about the books, and I mean, really, it's easy to talk about the books, but there's God stories behind the books, right?
Mhm.
And that's kind of what the impetus is of why we're doing the interview today, because I do know that you gotta have a story, you know, every woman does, but that typically drives women to want to write books, right? Or, to relate and, or help others relate,
Mhm.
um, with the story or women to relate, you know? And so I really appreciate you sharing that part too, about what really influenced you in your healing too. And so let's talk a little bit more about the Hope Remains God story. So, however you want to share that with the audience, do tell us about your Hope Remains story.
I came up with this tagline because one thing that I have struggled with almost as long as I can remember, since high school at least, um, are some dark thoughts and thoughts of ending my life. And I've actually attempted suicide a couple of times. And the way I look at it now is, if I had been successful 10 years ago, 12 years ago when I tried, if I'd been successful 20 years ago when I tried, all of the things that I would have missed. I mean, you truly never know um, what's around the next corner. In
Right.
fact, one of one of my attempts, um, the police officer who rescued me told me that life is like the ocean. You never know what the next wave is going to bring in. And that meant so much to me. I actually got a tattoo of a wave um,
Oh, wow. Where?
after that interaction. It's on my hip. That
Oh,
being
oh,
said,
cool.
that being
Okay.
said, I didn't realize that I'm also a type 1 diabetic, and I didn't realize that you can't inject through where there's a
Oh,
tattoo.
no.
So the tattoo's a little large, and it takes up a lot of real estate that I wish I hadn't
Oh,
used on that. I should have put it somewhere that I don't also need to put insulin, but that's a different story.
yeah.
Um, but for me, the tagline is, um, really just, it's a way for me to keep going on the days and sometimes weeks or months at a stretch that um, I really don't know how I'm going to get up in the mornings. And it can't just be about, all of the people that need me. Like my mother needs me, my daughter needs me. My mother has Alzheimer's, so, she's only going to deteriorate and she needs me. And that is sometimes the only thing that gets me up. But, really knowing that there's so much hope still for myself in this life. There's a post that I made a long time ago saying, you hope that you get the job, or you hope that you sign the book contract, or, you hope that the pregnancy test is positive or the cancer test is negative. But what happens when those things don't come true for you, the things that you were really, really kind of putting all of your eggs in a basket with, um, that the only thing that is truly there that we can put our hope in is Jesus. Like he's the
Yes.
only thing that no matter what, there's Jesus. No matter if we if this life ends, there's still Jesus. So it was those were the words that spoke to me as I was creating my website and creating my brand and all of that as a novelist.
Well, that's so beautiful. And you know what? There could be a listener out here that is like that right now. And those two words really resonate with them,
I
Jessica.
hope so.
And you
I
could be
hope so.
saving the life of a woman that could be listening to this right now, or two, that could feel hopeless, and by sharing who how real Jesus was to you when you were there at that place, and you now cling on to at times, which we all do when, things get hard. We know sometimes that only Jesus can give us the hope that we need, because circumstantially, sometimes the things that we put our hope in don't always work, right? So I think it's really profound, to share that, because that's so, to me, that is hope, is being able to know that Jesus Christ is the hope that we have when everything just in this world that we value or hold on to just isn't there, you know?
Exactly.
So when you were at that point, you grew up a believer, right, Jessica, or in a believing home?
I did. I did.
Yeah, yeah,
I made a lot of bad choices for several years, but he never let go of me. So
yeah. Well, I think a lot of us make bad choices, and we have to spread our wings, right, sometimes, and as a result of that, there's consequences. But, when you're making those bad choices, you don't I mean, sometimes the enemy comes in and, you listen to the lies, or you don't have that open, awareness of outcomes. But when you were at your lowest point, Jessica, w you know, was it just that you felt like, you couldn't go on because of the pain that you were in?
um life was just hard. The first time that I tried, I had grown up, as I said, in a Christian home, and I was always determined I was not going to have go farther than I should be going with any boys until I was married. Like that was just it
Oh,
was the
yeah,
thing. I didn't
yeah.
question it. It was I wasn't tempted. It was good. Um, then right after I turned 18, I ended up losing my virginity to a rapist, and
Mhm.
that spun me down this path.
Yeah.
Um, God redeems everything, and He really did redeem that. But um, that was the first time that it went from more than being just a thought of something that I considered to something that I actually attempted. Um, I'm not gonna say that was, you know, I came to my senses then, and then, I became a mom and I realized I had to live for her. And I did try, but there were still a lot of times that I thought about it, and there were still times I considered it, and there were still times I tried, even as she was growing up. But I would say the lowest point wasn't necessarily that it was my lowest emotional point. It was just kind of everything. I'd backed myself into such a bad situation. Um, I had left my abusive husband and many years later married someone that turned out to be an alcoholic and also had some other very serious things that made our marriage not work that
Mhm.
I don't want to share
Yeah.
too much because,
Yeah. Yeah.
but but right after we got married, like within 2 or 3 months of us getting married, I got really sick. And that was, I think, that was the wake up call. Like that definitely was the wake up call. I was, and the story,
Yeah.
I was misdiagnosed for several months. I was in a coma. I
Yeah.
um, was brought back from what they had told my parents was going to be certain death, and to prepare to start making arrangements for me to not survive it. And surviving that really kind of spun everything around for me. So that was my lowest point, but it
Yeah.
also was this incredible launching. It was what inspired my very first novel, which is about a young woman whose mother does die without them resolving some things that were going on between them. And as you say, every woman has a story. There's kind of a story within that story because the mom was keeping journals of her life and her daughter finds the journals. And so it's just kind of, realizing for the daughter, realizing that the mom was dealing with so many things that she just never knew about. And it's just amazing how God can use truly the darkest, scariest situation of my life and brought about
Yeah.
this whole other path.
Yeah. From what I understand as you and I've got to know each other and what you have shared, you're resurrected. You were almost resurrected from the dead. I mean, it's just, and look at you now. And you're getting ready to go meet a, s- a possible movie director, right? I mean, for your book movie, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and you're in a healthy relationship, and this is the father of your daughter, right? That you
Mhm.
married, and
Mhm.
you're with him, and oh my gosh, and your mom, you're there, and your daughter is there, and she's now grown, and you're just so blessed with her. And I mean, you could just see your face.
If even 10 years ago, you told me that this was
Yeah.
coming, I wouldn't have believed it. I had a whole different trajectory that I was gonna go when my daughter moved to Paris, which has been, this summer makes 10 years since she moved, and I was gonna move to Nashville, Tennessee, and I'd just gotten a degree in occupational therapy, and so I was gonna go and I was gonna, work in healthcare, and I was gonna live in my favorite city, and I was gonna do all of the things I'd never gotten to do because I'd been so focused on being a mom and essentially being a single mom for most of my daughter's life,
Yeah.
and, yeah, would have never guessed. Didn't move to Nashville, although that might actually happen in the next year, but for a completely different reason. Um, my daughter's there. She's doing great. My relationship with my mom has continued to be strong, and I'm so glad because I actually wasn't living in the same city as her 10 years ago either. So we're back here now, and God just worked that out the way we were living in Texas and then COVID hit, and we ended up moving back to Raleigh, North Carolina, which is where my mom and dad live. And
Mhm.
the timing was perfect because um, within a year of that move, we started to see signs of dementia with her, and she got her Alzheimer's diagnosis
Mhm.
a year later. So if I hadn't been here, it just would have been a lot trickier.
Yeah. Tell us about the series, the book series. Okay. Because you've had the book, the one book, and then you've got the series now.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of cool from what you've shared with me, but let us hear a little bit more about this
Yes.
series of books.
So, the year after I actually was tuberculosis that I had, and the year after I survived that, that whole first year was a lot of therapy. I had like 4 lung surgeries. I had a lot going on, but I had been inspired to write this story. So I wrote the first couple chapters, and then life happened and I set it to the side. I decided to go to school for OT
Right.
and put the book to the side. And because I was working in healthcare and because I was vulnerable because of all of my lung issues, when COVID came about, I said, well, not going to go work in a hospital. Had just moved back to North Carolina. Um, and I was like, let me go dust off those old chapters and just see if it's anything worth saving and working on. And I really liked what I'd written. So I finished the book, got an agent. And while I was writing the book, several of the other characters just felt like they wanted to tell their stories as well. So the second book, which is just nearing completion, will be the next one to come out, is sequential. So it's the first story is the story of a woman named Elle Reed. The second one is her best friend Carrie. Um, and they're not light and fluffy stories. They do deal with some heavy topics. And my agent, as we're watching everything that's just happening in the world, she said, would you consider writing a romance? Like maybe go for something a little bit lighter. And for a long time, I said I wouldn't write romance because I just felt like I wasn't qualified. Like I'd had such a crazy personal experience with romance and love and marriage and everything else. And I said, there are other people that can write romance. I'm not one of them. But after a couple of years of her asking, and I really am kind of a snarky kind of person. Like my humor's kind of snarky.
It's
And
all
so I
right.
said, well,
We
I
need
said if
snarky, Jessica. We do.
I just, I said, if you'll let me write a rom-com instead of just a straight romance. And she said, and I proposed my idea and she really, really liked it. And so that rom-com, which I can't talk too much about because it's currently in the hands of 2 different
Yeah.
editors that are considering it, but became like my favorite story. It was so much fun to write. I was like, wait a minute. She's like, I think that this is your jam. Like, I think this is what you should be doing. And so I started another one that I had an idea for, and then something hilarious happened to my daughter. She got trapped in her elevator of her apartment building in Paris, 2 winters ago. For, like, hours, she was trapped,
That's scary. Oh,
and it was scary, and she was
yeah.
annoyed more than anything.
Yeah. Oh,
But,
yeah.
but a couple of months after that, I said, "Are we ready to laugh about this yet? Because I've just come up with a really funny premise, and I think this could make a good movie." So we ended up kind of spitballing ideas for like an hour and took a bunch of notes. And I called up, she's essentially my best friend. So this is like not something that would typically have happened. If I didn't know her, then this movie would not be happening. But my best friend is a director
Yeah.
and she's done just a huge stack of movies. She writes a lot. She has her own production company and she directs for like Lifetime and things like that. So
That's
I called with
that's awesome. I
it
love
was
Lifetime movies.
it was a good in to
Yeah.
have, but I knew nothing about writing a script and obviously she did. So I called her and I said, I have this idea. Here's the general premise of the girl that gets trapped in an elevator and unknowingly meets the love of her life who is keeping her company on the other side of this elevator. Um, and she's like, I love it. Let's run with it. I said, okay. So here's all my notes, like, go write your script. She's like, no, no, no. Can you write the script? And I was like, I mean, I guess. And a couple of weeks later, she's like, okay, so can you have the script written in 2 weeks? And I was like, if I don't sleep, I can do that. So I wrote it, and we actually initially planned to shoot it last year. And some things happened with our investor who just kind of like had to back his investment down. And so we pushed it to this year. So we'll be shooting it this year, and it is the lightest story I've ever written because I didn't want to. It's a lot to write a script and to try to fit everything into 100 pages. Like that's very different than writing a
Yeah,
novel.
I couldn't. I would struggle. Yeah,
Well, I was really glad to have the extra time because I've
yeah.
reworked it a couple of times, nothing major, just some tweaks, but, I really like how it came out. So that's been the lightest one, but of course, I, reached out to my agent and I said, "I don't really know how this works since it's a script, like, do you have to be involved? Do you have to do anything?" And she said, "No, I don't, but I love this story. Will you write it as a manuscript as well?" And I was like, "Nope, not gonna do that, like, it's done, it's a movie, I'm finished." And a couple months went by, and I finally said, "You know what? I decided to turn it into a manuscript. We'll just see. We'll see how it comes out." But so I'm working on that as well. But
Okay.
it's been kind of interesting to write, these deep stories, about a woman who loses her mother, and um, the 4 books in the series. So it ended up being the best friend is like the sequential, and then books 3 and 4 are intersecting stories with the first one, and they are they're more serious, and I think
Mm.
the timing will be right when they do come out, but, um, life was heavy and just had to kinda switch and do something a little bit lighter, so
Okay. Well, yeah. Sounds like you've got some really exciting things ahead, Jessica. It's been such a joy getting to know you and learning more about you and about your story and how God redeemed it. How inspiring. And I know that, there's so much more that He's going to do and continue to do through your books as you share these stories. And so, do you have any closing words for the listeners that you would want to share? If you have any, Bible verses that were very impacting, when you were going through or as you go through. I know you have in the background prayer changes. I know you've got, very passionate, yeah, it changes us and everything there. But however you want to wrap up our conversation here, and also let us know how we can reach you, and
yes.
all of that.
So I would say, when I meet with groups of writers, sometimes I have tended to feel a little less than because I write fiction and, everyone else is out there being all, you know they're theologians and they've got this like really serious element to they're writing Bible studies and things like that. But the more I've thought about it, some people, I have a friend who writes about grief. She lost her mother, and she has a very heartfelt story about dealing with grief. And she had me on her podcast one day, and really, she pointed out there are some people that a book like hers will help them to deal with their grief, and there are others that aren't quite ready to face it that directly. But reading a fiction story about a young woman
Mhm.
who has lost her mother could be something that helps them because the emotions are still there, the feelings are still there, the reactions and all of that are ingrained in the story. So I kind of look at it like I do write fiction, but whether it's one of my rom-coms or whether it's part of this Thornbush and Juniper story series, um, everything is biblical, everything is rooted in faith, and everything has come from a lot of being on my knees, just praying that the words that I use are going to help somebody with something. So, you mentioned this that's behind me, and it actually says it's a quote from the novel, Prayer doesn't change God, prayer changes us. And it's just something that, threw up there one day because, um, I spend a lot of time praying that this dream of mine will come true, or that dream, or my mother's health, or my daughter's success, or things like that. And the purpose of prayer is not to convince God of how much we need him to work in our favor for something. The purpose of prayer is to align our hearts and, our wills with his. And so that's something that the mother shares with the daughter who is, the daughter is I wanted to be more like the mother in the book when I wrote it. Like, I'm like, oh, she's, full of wisdom. She has these journals. She's dropping all these nuggets. Um, Everyone kept telling me, no, you're actually the daughter because you're really stubborn like her. And the daughter had also kind of veered off track, even though she was raised by a Christian mom. She did a lot of things that she's now dealing with the repercussions of. And so in the story, I was kind of learning and growing in my own faith as I wrote it. And there's just a lot of little pieces like that in the story that are things that God showed me as I was writing it. And as far as knowing more about me, I have a website. It is jessicastonestories.com. I have social media where I'm Jessica Stone Storyteller on everything. I love to tell stories about my life, and I've gotten a little bit more bold when it comes to sharing really how God has worked through a lot of the things that I was just ashamed of for a long time.
You have gotten bold, even since the first time you and I spoke. I can tell. I can
Done a
tell.
lot of podcasts since then.
Yeah, I can tell. And you're at peace. You seem to be okay. I mean, it's hard, every time we tell our stories, and if they're troubled stories or hard stories or trauma filled stories, you know, they can raise up a lot of emotions and all of that, even when you've given it to God and you're in a good place and you're happy. But writing, I mean, I had warfare, a lot of warfare. I'm writing my book and my devotional, my personal healing memoir story. I didn't want to do it, you know, it was tough. But, when God calls us and wants to use what we're sharing with others to encourage them, to build their faith, to heal them, all to help them walk free, to move forward in their life. If it's healing mother and daughter relationships, we're coming close to Mother's Day. So this is a great time for, us to be having a conversation and getting, your hope remains God's story out there too. So, I honor everything that you're doing with your daughter and your mother, Jessica. It is not easy. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for being willing to come on this show and to take the time and, to talk through what we've talked through today. And I know God's going to bless you and praying for your book that will turn into a movie. I really hope that really happens and all of that will come to fruition for you, Jessica, because um, you've got you've got a gift, there. And the fact that you're just being so brave and courageous and coming out and sharing when you've been at the pit, you were at the pit, and God has just taken you. So, friends, be so inspired by her and her story. And thanks again. We're going to have this out and we'll have an episode page for you and all of hopefully, some of these great pics and links to your books and all the things that our audience will be interested in knowing about you and being able to, go out and get your books and everything. So thank you. And
Thank you.
until the next show, friends, be heard and be healed.
Altered Stories Ministry is a faith-based, nonprofit, and women's evangelistic storytelling ministry. If you enjoyed listening to today's story, your family and friends would probably benefit from hearing how God works in the lives of women all over the world, too. So please, subscribe to our show and share the link to this podcast. Share it on your social media. We also welcome your valued feedback on our stories. Also, we'd appreciate your prayerful consideration in sponsoring one of our future God-glorifying stories and welcome your tax-exempt financial donation. To find out more on how you can support our ministry, you can log on to our website at www.alteredstories.org.